My family used my credit card without permission. What I discovered. At the Christmas party, changed everything. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Charges. December had started with a snowstorm in Boston, a fitting beginning to what would become the most turbulent month of my life. I was curled up on my studio apartment's window seat, watching snowflakes twirl and dance in the glow of streetlights, when my phone buzzed with the notification. Unusual spending detected on your account, I sighed, placing my mug of tea on the side table and tapping on the alert. My bank's app opened to display a series of transactions that made my stomach drop. $479 at Nordstrom, $356 at Williams-Sonoma, $289 at Apple, and over a dozen other purchases ranging from $29 to $150, all made within the past 3 days. None of them were mine. What the hell? I muttered, scrolling through the charges in disbelief as my heart began to race. The total amount hovered just below $3,000, nearly half my monthly salary as a research assistant at Boston University. My fingers trembled slightly as I quickly navigated to put a freeze on my card. My name is Eliza Cassidy, 28 years old, and until this moment I'd prided myself on my financial responsibility. Unlike many of my peers still drowning in student loans, I'd managed to pay off most of my debt through scholarships, part-time work, and careful budgeting. I'd been saving diligently for the past 3 years to finally move out of my tiny apartment and put a down payment on a small condo. Those savings were separate from my checking account, but this credit card damage would still set me back significantly. I dialed the customer service number on the back of my card, pacing back and forth in my small living space as I waited. The representative who answered was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. Ms. Cassidy, it appears these charges were made with the physical card, not just the card number, she explained after reviewing the transactions. That's impossible, I said. My card is right here. I pulled my wallet from my purse and flipped it open. The credit card slot was empty. My heart skipped a beat. I dumped the contents of my purse onto the couch and rifled through everything, but the card wasn't there. Panic began to rise in my chest. When was the last time you used your card? The representative asked. Last weekend, I replied, thinking, back. I was at my parents' house in Lexington for Thanksgiving. I used it to pick up some groceries for dinner. And you're certain no one else had access to your card or wallet? The question gave me pause. I'd spent 4 days at my parents' suburban home, along with my older brother Alan, his wife Rebecca, and their twins. My younger sister Meg had been there too, having recently moved back in with our parents after her breakup. The house had been full, hectic, and at times chaotic. I suppose my family was around my things, I admitted reluctantly, but they wouldn't. Ms. Cassidy, the representative cut in gently. Unfortunately, a significant percentage of credit card fraud is committed by family members or close acquaintances. Would you like to file a fraud claim, or do you need time to investigate further? The implication hit me like a bucket of ice water. Someone in my family had taken my credit card and gone on a shopping spree. The thought was so absurd, so hurtful, that my first instinct was to deny it completely. I'll call you back, I said abruptly and ended the call. I sank onto my couch, surrounded by the scattered contents of my purse, trying to process what was happening. My family wasn't perfect, whose was, but we were close. My parents, Richard and Helen Cassidy, had raised us with strong values and open communication. We had our disagreements and personality clashes, sure, but theft? That seemed inconceivable. Mom and Dad were comfortably retired after decades of working in education, Dad as a high school principal, and Mom as a literature professor. They lived modestly but well within their means. Alan, my older brother by 4 years, was a successful architect with a beautiful home in Cambridge, married to Rebecca, a pediatrician. They had 5-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, and a picture-perfect life by all appearances. My younger sister Meg, 25, was the family's free spirit, a talented artist who worked at an indie gallery and had recently ended a 2-year relationship with her girlfriend Jade. None of them needed money desperately. Enough to steal from me, did they? I tried to recall every moment from Thanksgiving weekend when my wallet might have been left unattended. I'd arrived Thursday morning and stayed until Sunday afternoon. My wallet had mostly remained in my overnight bag in the guest room, though I'd taken it with me for the grocery run and when we all went to see a movie on Saturday. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone again and dialed Alan's number. If anyone would give me straight talk, it would be my pragmatic older brother. "Hey, Liz," he answered, the sounds of children shrieking with laughter in the background. "What's up?" "Alan, I need to ask you something weird," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you happen to use my credit card recently? Or see anyone else use it?" The background noise dimmed, as if he'd moved to another room. "What? No, of course not. Why would you ask me that?" "Someone used my card to charge almost $3,000 in the past few days, and the bank says it was the physical card, not just the number." I swallowed hard. I can't find my card, and the last time I remember using it was during Thanksgiving at Mom and Dad's. There was a long pause before Alan spoke again. "Liz, are you seriously asking if someone in our family stole your credit card?" Put that way, it did sound ridiculous. "I don't know what to think, Al. The card is gone, and someone's been using it all over Boston." "Well, it wasn't me," he said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "And I can't imagine it was anyone else either. Maybe you dropped it somewhere, or someone pickpocketed you." "Maybe," I conceded, though I didn't believe it. I rarely took my wallet out of my bag, and I certainly would have noticed if someone had been close enough to pickpocket me. "Sorry to bother you." "It's fine," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Have you called Mom and Dad?" "Not yet. You were my first call." "Well, good luck with that conversation," he said dryly. "Let me know what happens with the bank." After hanging up, I felt even worse. Alan was right. How could I accuse my own family? But the evidence pointed squarely in their direction. With a deep breath, I called my parents' house. Mom answered on the third ring. "Eliza, what a lovely surprise. Dad and I were just talking about you." "Hi, Mom," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "How are you?" "Oh, we're fine, dear. Your father's fighting a bit of a cold, but nothing serious. How about you? Keeping warm in that drafty apartment of yours?" The familiar concern in her voice made my throat tighten with emotion. How could I ask her what I needed to ask? "Mom," I began carefully, "I'm calling because something strange happened. My credit card is missing, and someone's been using it to make a lot of purchases." "Oh, no! You should call the bank right away." I did. They said it was used with the physical card, not just the number. The last time I remember having it was at your house during Thanksgiving. There was a pause. "What are you saying, Eliza?" I closed my eyes, hating myself for the question I was about to ask. "Did you or Dad happen to see my card anywhere? Or did either of you borrow it for any reason?" "Elizabeth Ann Cassidy," my mother said, using my full name as she only did when deeply disappointed. "Are you accusing your father and me of stealing from you?" "No. I mean, not exactly. I'm just trying to figure out what happened." "Well, I can assure you that neither your father nor I would ever take your credit card. I'm actually quite hurt that you would even ask such a thing." Guilt washed over me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm just desperate to understand what happened." Her voice softened slightly. "Have you asked your siblings?" I spoke to Alan. He doesn't know anything about it. "And Meg?" I hesitated. "Not yet." Mom said, a note of something unidentifiable in her voice. "Well, you should talk to her too, just to be thorough. Though I'm sure she wouldn't know anything about it either." After promising to keep her updated and apologizing again, I ended the call and stared at my phone. Only Meg left to ask. My artist, sister, The family rebel, the one who'd moved back home claiming her breakup had left her financially and emotionally devastated. The one who, now that I thought about it, had admired my new boots and anthropology sweater during Thanksgiving, asking wistfully how I could afford such things on a research assistant's salary. I didn't want to believe it, but as I dialed Meg's number, a sinking feeling told me I might have found my culprit. The call went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's Meg. If it's important, text me. If it's Mom, yes, I'm eating vegetables. Everyone. Else, leave a message if you want." I ended the call without leaving a message and immediately sent a text instead. "Need to talk to you ASAP. Call me. It's important." Then I called the bank back and filed a fraud claim, feeling like the worst sister in the world. Barbara Chapter 2. Family Ties. The next morning, I woke to find my phone devoid of any response from Meg. My text remained unread, which was unusual for my phone-addicted sister. Concern began to mingle with my suspicion. What if I was wrong? What if something had happened to her? I called my parents' house again, and Dad answered this time, his voice raspy from his cold. "Hey, Dad, is Meg around? I've been trying to reach her." "She left early this morning for some art thing in New York," he replied. "Said she'd be back Sunday night. Why? Is everything okay?" So she was avoiding me. "Everything's fine," I lied. "Just had a question about Christmas gifts." Did she happen to mention where she was staying in New York? "Some friend's place, I think. You know your sister. Always vague on the details." After a few more minutes of conversation, I hung up and stared at the ceiling. The bank had promised to investigate the charges, but warned me it could take up to 10 business days to resolve the case. Meanwhile, I was left with significantly less available credit and a gnawing uncertainty about my own sister. I decided to do some investigating of my own. Opening my laptop, I pulled up the list of transactions from my bank statement and began searching for the stores. "Is Alan home?" "In his home office. We weren't expecting you. Is everything okay?" I must have looked as troubled as I felt. "Not really. I need to talk to him about something." Rebecca's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in concern, but she nodded. "I'll get him. Make yourself comfortable. Would you like some tea?" "No, thanks." She disappeared upstairs and I sank onto their plush sofa, suddenly exhausted. The magnitude of what I'd discovered was hitting me in waves. My own sister had stolen from me, and not just pocket change, thousands of dollars. Alan appeared a few minutes later, looking slightly annoyed at the interruption, but concerned nonetheless. "Liz, what's going on? Rebecca said you look upset." "It's Meg," I said simply. "She took my card." Alan sat down heavily across from me. "Are you sure? That's a serious accusation." I told him about the art store, about what the clerk had said. "She told him she'd come into some money. She bought expensive art supplies, Alan, and that's just one charge among dozens." "Shit," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Have you confronted her?" "I can't reach her. She's supposedly in New York until Sunday." "Conveniently timed trip," he remarked dryly. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. The bank is investigating, but—" I trailed off, the reality of the situation overwhelming me. "This is going to destroy Mom and Dad. You know how they are about Meg, always making excuses for her, always giving her second chances." Alan's face hardened. "She's nearly 26, not 16. This isn't just a family matter, Liz. It's credit card fraud. It's a crime." "I know that," I snapped, then immediately regretted it. "Sorry, I don't understand why she would do this to me." Alan was quiet for a moment. "Look, there's something you should know. I wasn't going to tell you because Mom and Dad swore me to secrecy, but in light of this—" He sighed. "Meg's in trouble, Liz. Bigger trouble than just a bad breakup." My stomach clenched. What kind of trouble? The expensive kind. She and Jade didn't just break up. They were living together, and Meg's name was on the lease for their apartment. When Jade moved out, she left Meg with 3 months of back rent and utility bills, and apparently, Meg hasn't been selling much art lately. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Alan shrugged helplessly. You know how it is. Mom and Dad didn't want you to worry, and Meg was too proud to ask you for help. They've been helping her with the bills, but it strained their retirement budget. Dad mentioned they might have to dip into their principal for the first time. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Meg was desperate, too proud to ask for help, and saw an opportunity when my card was accessible. That still doesn't justify stealing from me, I said, tears pricking at my eyes. She could have asked. I would have helped her if I could. No, Alan said gently. And for what it's worth, I agree with you. This crosses a line. But I also know our sister, and I'm guessing she's spiraling right now, probably panicking about what she's done and how to fix it. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her face troubled. I couldn't help overhearing. This is about your credit card. I nodded miserably. I'm so sorry, Eliza, she said, coming to sit beside me. What a terrible position to be in. Her sympathy almost undid me. I'd been holding it together through shock and determination, but now the emotional weight of the betrayal hit full force. A sob escaped me before I could stop it. The worst part, I managed between tears, is that Christmas is coming up. We're all supposed to be at Mom and Dad's for their annual party in 3 weeks. How am I supposed to face her? How are we supposed to pretend everything's normal? Alan and Rebecca exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. You don't have to pretend, Alan said finally. You have every right to confront her, to demand she make this right. But Mom and Dad need to know what their daughter has done, he finished firmly. Protecting Meg from consequences isn't doing her any favors. It never has. He was right, of course. But the thought of shattering our parents' holiday with this revelation made me sick. They loved Christmas more than any other time of year, especially the elaborate party they threw for family, friends, and neighbors on Christmas Eve. It was a tradition going back to our childhood, complete with Mom's famous eggnog, Dad's carefully curated playlist of classic carols, and enough food to feed a small army. Maybe I should just wait until after the holidays, I suggested weakly. Deal with it in January. Alan shook his head. And let her get away with it for another month? What if she does it to someone else in the meantime? What if she's already done this to Mom and Dad and they're covering for her? That possibility hadn't occurred to me, and it sent a chill down my spine. You think she might have? I don't know, he admitted. But I wouldn't rule it out if she's desperate enough to steal from you. We talked for another hour, going in circles about what to do. In the end, we agreed that I would try to speak with Meg privately when she returned from New York, before the family Christmas party. If she admitted what she'd done and agreed to pay me back, we'd keep it between us for now. If not, well, we'd cross that bridge when we came to it. As I was leaving, Rebecca hugged me tightly. Family complications are the worst, she said. You know we're here for you, whatever you decide to do. I thanked her, grateful for her support, but still feeling utterly adrift. The subway ride back to my apartment was a blur of emotional turmoil. I kept cycling through disbelief, anger, hurt, and a strange, guilty sense of responsibility. Had I somehow failed Meg as a sister? Should I have checked in more, noticed she was struggling? By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had overwhelmed everything else. I collapsed onto my bed fully clothed and fell into a troubled sleep, dreaming of credit cards falling like snow and Meg's face looking back at me from every store window. Chapter 3. Confrontation. Sunday evening arrived with still no word from Meg. According to our parents, she'd texted to say her train was delayed and she wouldn't be back until late. I suspected she was deliberately avoiding me, which only strengthened my resolve to confront her as soon as possible. Monday morning, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and took the commuter rail to Lexington. The weather had turned even colder, with a bitter wind that cut through my coat as I walked the half-mile from the station to my parents' house. By the time I arrived, my cheeks were numb and my determination had hardened into something like anger. Mom answered the door, surprise and delight lighting up her face. "Eliza, what a wonderful surprise. Come in, you look frozen." The house was warm and smelled of cinnamon and coffee. I stepped inside, immediately transported back to childhood by the familiar scents and sights. The worn entryway rug, the gallery wall of family photos climbing up the staircase, the grandfather clock that had belonged to my father's father, ticking steadily in the hall. "Is Meg home?" I asked, unwinding my scarf. "She's still sleeping," Mom replied. "Got in very late last night. Some problem with the trains. Are you staying for lunch?" I was just about to make soup. "That depends on Meg," I said, my tone causing Mom to look at me more closely. "Is everything all right, dear? You look tense." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell Mom everything right then, to let her help navigate this mess as she'd helped with so many childhood crises. But Alan was right. This wasn't a childhood crisis. This was adult betrayal. "I just need to talk to Meg about something," I said finally. "Is Dad around?" "At his doctor's appointment for that cold. It's turning into bronchitis, I'm afraid. He should be back in an hour or so." She studied my face. "Are you sure nothing's wrong?" "I'll let you know after I talk to Meg," I replied, heading for the stairs. "Which room is she in now?" "Your old room, actually. We converted her room to a little office space after she moved in with Jade. We'll move things around if this arrangement becomes more permanent, but for now." I nodded and climbed the stairs, a strange dissonance washing over me. Meg was sleeping in my childhood bedroom, the place where I'd spent 16 years of my life before college. It felt like an invasion. Somehow, though I knew that was irrational, the house belonged to our parents. They could use the rooms however they wished. Outside the bedroom door, I paused, listening. No sound came from within. I knocked firmly. "Meg, it's Eliza. We need to talk." Silence, then the rustle of bedding. "Liz?" Meg's voice was thick with sleep. "What time is it?" "Nearly 11. Open. Up." More rustling than footsteps. The door opened to reveal my sister, hair tousled, eyes puffy, wearing an oversized t-shirt and flannel pajama bottoms. She looked younger than her 25 years, vulnerable in a way that momentarily softened my anger. "What are you doing here?" she asked, stifling a yawn. "Aren't you supposed to be at work?" "I took the day off to deal with my stolen credit card situation," I said pointedly, watching her face. Her expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. A flash of guilt quickly masked. "Oh yeah, I saw your text. Sorry I didn't reply. My trip got super hectic." "Can I come in?" She stepped back, gesturing vaguely to the room. That had once been mine, but now bore little resemblance to my former space. The walls, once pale blue, were now covered in Meg's artwork and posters. The desk where I'd studied was piled with sketchbooks and art supplies. The bookshelf that had housed my collection of classic novels now displayed sculptures and pottery. I sat on the edge of the bed, and Meg took the desk chair, pulling her knees up to her chest defensively. "I know it was you, Meg," I said without preamble. "I know you took my credit card during Thanksgiving and went on a shopping spree." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, then immediately tried to compose her features. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, anger surging back. "I went to Studio 412. The owner recognized you, said you were in on Tuesday buying expensive German watercolors and special paper, claiming you'd come into some money." Color drained from Meg's face. For a moment, I thought she might continue to deny it, but then her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I was going to pay you back," she whispered, staring at the floor. "I just needed to get through this rough patch." Despite having suspected, known, really, it was her. Hearing the confirmation from her own lips sent a wave of disappointment through me so powerful it was almost physical. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I'm your sister. If you needed money, why didn't you just ask?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because you would have said no. Or worse, you would have said yes and then held it over my head forever, like some sort of saint. Poor Meg can't get her life together, always needing bailouts." The unfairness of this accusation stung. When have I ever treated you like that? Name one time I've made you feel bad about needing help. "You don't have to say anything," she cried. "It's the way you live, Liz. So perfect, so responsible. Your neat little apartment, your prestigious university job, your savings account. Meanwhile, I'm back living with Mom and Dad at 25. Because my girlfriend left me with a mountain of debt and no one will buy my art. So that justifies stealing from me? Taking almost $3,000 without permission?" She wiped angrily at her tears. "I didn't mean for it to get so out of hand. I just needed the art supplies for this commission. It could be my big break, Liz. 5 pieces for the lobby of that new hotel downtown. But I had no materials, and they wanted samples right away." "And the clothes? The electronics? The housewares?" I countered. "Were those for your big break too?" Meg's face crumpled. "No," she admitted in a small voice. "Those were... I don't... know. I just kept going. It felt good to buy things again, to not have to worry about money for a few days. I was going to stop, but then... Then what? Then I figured the damage was already done. You'd be mad whether it was 300 or 3,000, and I really was planning to pay you back after I got paid for the commission." I shook my head in disbelief. "Do you even hear yourself? You're rationalizing theft, Meg, from your own sister." "I know," she whispered. "I know it was wrong. I'm sorry, Liz. I really am." Her apology, though seemingly sincere, did little to soothe the hurt and betrayal I felt. "Sorry doesn't fix this. The bank is investigating it as fraud." "That's a crime, Meg. You could face serious consequences." Fear flashed across her face. "You reported it as fraud? Why would you do that?" "Because it is fraud," I exploded. "What? Did you expect me to do when thousands of dollars of charges showed up on my account? Just shrug and pay the bill?" "No, but..." She broke off, panic rising in her voice. "Are you going to tell Mom and Dad?" "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. "But they're going to find out one way or another. This isn't something we can just sweep under the rug." "Please, Liz," she begged, sliding off the chair to kneel in front of me. "Please don't tell them. Dad's already stressed about money and you know how Mom worries. It would break their hearts." I looked down at my sister, my little sister who I'd helped teach to ride a bike, who I'd defended from bullies in middle school, who I'd driven to her first art show, and felt a complicated mix of love, disappointment, and responsibility. "Here's what's going to happen," I said finally. "You're going to tell the bank it was you. You're going to take responsibility and work out a payment plan. And you're going to get help, Meg. Real help. This isn't just about money. It's about whatever is going on with you that made you think this was okay. They'll press charges," she whispered fearfully. "I'll have a record. No one will hire me for teaching jobs or residencies." "Not necessarily," I said, though I wasn't actually sure. "If you come forward voluntarily and agree to repay everything, they might be willing to handle it privately." Meg was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it. But please, can we wait until after Christmas to tell Mom and Dad? Please, Liz, let them have one last happy holiday before they find out what a disappointment I am." She didn't say it, but I heard it in her voice. Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing. "Fine, until after Christmas, but you call the bank today." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. I swear I'll make this right." I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the emotional confrontation. "I need to go. I'll text you the bank's fraud department number." "You're not staying for lunch?" The idea of sitting across from her at our parents' table, pretending everything was normal while this deception hung between us, was unbearable. "No, I need some space right now, Meg." Her face fell, but she nodded. "I understand." As I turned to leave, a glint of something metallic caught my eye on the desk beneath a sketchbook. I moved closer and saw the edge of a credit card. My credit card, partially hidden under Meg's art supplies. Without a word, I picked it up and pocketed it. A fresh wave of anger rising at the realization that she hadn't even bothered to dispose of the evidence. Had she been planning to use it again? "Liz," Meg started, but I cut her off with a raised hand. "I don't want to hear it. Just call the bank." I left her room without looking back, hurried past Mom in the kitchen with a hastily manufactured excuse about an emergency at work, and practically ran the half-mile back to the train station. It wasn't until I was seated on the train, watching the suburban landscape give way to the city, that I allowed myself to cry. Quick, silent tears that I wiped away with my sleeve before fellow passengers could notice. I felt hollowed out, as if something essential had been scooped from my chest. My phone buzzed with a text from Meg. "I called the bank. They're sending paperwork. I promise I'll fix this." I didn't reply. Chapter 4. Ripple Effects. The week that followed my confrontation with Meg passed in a blur of work, restless nights, and awkward family communications. True to her word, Meg had contacted the bank and admitted to using my card without permission. The bank, somewhat to my surprise, had agreed not to pursue criminal charges as long as she signed a repayment agreement, and I, as the cardholder, didn't press the issue. I'd received a formal letter outlining the resolution. The fraudulent charges would be removed from my account, and Meg would repay the bank directly over the next 18 months. It was a relief financially, but emotionally I remained raw and uncertain. Mom called nearly every day, clearly sensing that something was wrong despite my attempts to act normal. "Are you sure everything's okay, sweetheart? You've seemed so distant lately." "Just busy with end-of-semester stuff," I'd reply, hating the lie, but committed to keeping our pact of silence until after Christmas. Alan checked in regularly as well, wanting updates on the situation. "Has she started paying you back yet?" he asked during one of our calls. "She's paying the bank, not me," I explained. "And yes, she sent the first payment according to the agreement." "And you're still planning to wait until after Christmas to tell Mom and Dad?" I sighed. "That's the plan. I don't want to ruin their Christmas. You know how much the holiday means to them." "I still think you're making a mistake," Alan said. "Keeping secrets like this has a way of backfiring." "It's just for a few more weeks," I insisted, though his words stirred my own doubts. "Then we'll deal with it properly." But as the days passed and Christmas drew closer, the weight of the secret grew heavier. I found myself dreading the annual Cassidy Christmas party, an event I'd always loved, and the forced proximity to Meg it would entail. How were we supposed to exchange gifts and sing carols as if nothing had happened? Meanwhile, Meg had taken to texting me daily. Apologies, updates on her commission progress, links to articles about rebuilding trust after financial betrayal. I responded minimally, still too hurt to engage fully, but unwilling to shut her out. Completely. "Got the first payment in today," she texted on Friday afternoon. "The hotel loved my samples. Full commission confirmed." I stared at my phone, conflicted. Should I congratulate her? The commission was good news, a potential turning point in her struggling career. But the bitter part of me couldn't help thinking that her big break had been purchased with my stolen money. "Good," I replied simply, then set my phone aside. That evening, Rebecca called, an unusual occurrence since we typically communicated through Alan. "Eliza, do you have a minute?" "Sure," I said, curious about the reason for her call. "Is everything okay?" "Yes and no," she replied, her voice hesitant. "I'm calling because I'm concerned about you. Alan told me about the agreement with Meg and the bank." I sighed. I wish he hadn't. But yes, that's the situation. "Look, I know it's not my place as your sister-in-law, but I think you're underestimating how difficult the Christmas party will be for you. Pretending everything's normal when you're still processing this betrayal, it's a recipe for disaster." Her concern touched me. Rebecca and I had always been friendly, but we weren't particularly close. "I appreciate the worry, but I'll be fine. It's just one day." "That's just it," she pressed. "It won't be just one day. It will be intense, emotional, and exhausting. You'll be performing the whole time, and that takes a toll." She was right, of course. The thought of maintaining a cheerful facade through the entire party made me feel preemptively exhausted. "What's the alternative?" I asked. "Tell Mom and Dad now and ruin Christmas for everyone?" Rebecca hesitated. What if you didn't go?" The suggestion shocked me. Not attend the Cassidy Christmas party. It was unthinkable. I hadn't missed one since birth, not even during college when I'd had to travel through a snowstorm to get home. "I can't do that," I said automatically. "Mom and Dad would be devastated." "Maybe," Rebecca acknowledged. "Or maybe they'd understand if you told them you weren't feeling well. You could visit them earlier in the day, exchange gifts, and then bow out of the big party." The idea was tempting, a way to fulfill my family obligations without the extended performance, but it felt like running away. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Thanks for the suggestion." After hanging up, I wandered restlessly around my apartment, Rebecca's words echoing in my mind. Was I being naive and thinking I could get through the party without incident? Was I setting myself up for an even more painful confrontation? My phone buzzed with yet another text from Meg. "Found these old photos of us. Remember this camping trip? We were so happy." Attached was a picture from nearly 15 years ago. Meg and me at Lake Winnipesaukee, arms around each other, gap-toothed. Grins directed at the camera. Meg couldn't have been more than 10, which made me 13. Awkward, self-conscious, but clearly delighted to be posing with my little sister. The photo hit me like a physical blow. What had happened to those girls? When had things between us become so complicated, so damaged? I put the phone down without responding and went to bed early, but sleep eluded me. I kept thinking about the upcoming party, about facing my family with this secret between us, about what it would mean to break tradition and not attend. By morning, I'd made a decision. I would go to the party as planned, but I would not pretend. I wouldn't make a scene or confront Meg publicly, but neither would I act as if everything was fine. Let her see the consequences of her actions in my demeanor. Let her feel the weight of what she'd done. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt more honest than the alternatives. And honesty, I realized, was what I needed most right now, even if it made for an uncomfortable Christmas. Chapter 5. Preparations. As December progressed, Boston transformed into a winter wonderland. Fresh snow blanketed the city every few days. Shop windows sparkled with elaborate holiday displays, and the air was filled with the scent of roasting chestnuts from street vendors. Under normal circumstances, I would have been caught up in the seasonal magic. This year, however, the approaching holidays filled me with dread. The weekend before Christmas, I found myself in a department store, listlessly browsing for gifts. I'd always taken pride in my thoughtful present selection, but this year, my heart wasn't in it. What was the point of carefully chosen gifts when trust, the most valuable currency between family members, had been so thoroughly betrayed? Nevertheless, tradition demanded presents, so I mechanically added items to my cart. A leather-bound journal for Dad, who still preferred handwriting. His thoughts to typing them: a cashmere scarf for Mom in her favorite shade of teal, a set of architectural pencils for Alan, a pair of silver earrings for Rebecca. When it came to Meg, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to skip her gift entirely, a petty but satisfying form of punishment. But the wiser part knew that such an obvious slight would raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer yet. After wandering aimlessly through several departments, I finally selected a gift card to a popular art supply store. Impersonal, perhaps, but practical, and safely devoid of the emotional investment her gift would normally receive. As I stood in the checkout line, my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, Mom," I answered, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder while I fumbled for my wallet. The irony of using the same credit card that Meg had stolen wasn't lost on me. The bank had sent a replacement after canceling the compromised one. "Eliza, sweetheart, I'm just calling to finalize the arrangements for Christmas Eve. You're still planning to come over in the morning to help with preparations, aren't you?" It was our usual routine. I'd arrive early to help Mom cook and Dad decorate, while Alan, Rebecca, and the twins would join later in the afternoon. Meg typically slept late and appeared just in time to take credit for the beautifully arranged appetizer platters. "Of course," I said automatically, then hesitated. The thought of spending the entire day at the house, including extra hours with Meg, made my stomach clench. "Actually, Mom, I might be a little delayed this year. Work has been crazy, and I have some things to finish up." "On Christmas Eve?" Mom sounded dismayed. "Surely they can give you the day off." "It's not them, it's me," I said, aware of how flimsy the excuse sounded. "I want to make sure everything's properly wrapped up before the holiday break." There was a pause. "Is everything all right, Eliza? You've seemed distant lately. First that odd call about your credit card, and now this change in plans. I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong." My mother's intuition had always been unnervingly accurate. I swallowed hard, tempted to confess everything right then in the middle of the department store. "I'm fine, Mom. Just stressed about work and the holidays." "If you say so," she replied, clearly unconvinced. "But you know you can talk to me. About anything, right? Whatever it is." "I know," I said, guilt knotting my throat. "I'll see you Christmas Eve, okay?" Just a bit later than usual. After we hung up, I completed my purchase and left the store, feeling worse than when I'd entered. The weight of the secret was becoming unbearable, tainting even simple interactions with my mother. That evening, I wrapped the presents mechanically, without my usual attention to color-coordinated paper and handmade gift tags. As I sealed the last package, my phone buzzed with a text from Alan. "Rebecca mentioned she suggested you skip the party. Not a bad idea, sis. No one would blame you for taking care of yourself first." I typed back, "I'm going, but I'm not pretending. Everything's fine." His response came quickly. "Fair enough. We'll back you up whatever happens." The support, simple as it was, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. At least I wasn't entirely alone in this family drama. The next morning, Sunday, December 22nd, I was awoken by an insistent knocking at my door. Bleary-eyed and disoriented, I stumbled to answer it, expecting perhaps a delivery or my elderly neighbor who occasionally locked herself out. Instead, I found Meg standing in the hallway, a large portfolio case in one hand and a bakery box in the other. "Surprise," she said, with a nervous smile. "I brought breakfast and something else." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. She looked different than she had during our confrontation, more put together, her dark hair neatly styled, wearing a crisp button-down shirt rather than her usual artistic layers. "What are you doing here?" I finally managed. "Can I come in? It's freezing out here." I stepped aside reluctantly, watching as she placed the bakery box on my kitchen counter and carefully leaned the portfolio against the wall. I didn't invite you over, I said stiffly. I know, but we need to talk before Christmas, and you've been avoiding my calls and texts. I haven't been avoiding them. I've been processing them. There's a difference. Meg sighed. Fair enough. Look, I brought your favorite chocolate croissants from that bakery by the Common. She opened the box, revealing the flaky pastries. And coffee. Real coffee, not that instant stuff you drink. The gesture was so reminiscent of our pre-betrayal relationship that it made my chest ache. We used to do this regularly. Surprise. Each other with favorite treats, show up unannounced for impromptu sister dates. I'm not hungry, I lied, though the croissants did look tempting. Please, Liz, just sit down for 5 minutes. Let me show you what I brought. Against my better judgment, I took a seat at my small kitchen table. Meg placed a croissant on a plate in front of me, then retrieved the portfolio and sat opposite me. The commission is going really well, she began, opening the case. I wanted you to be the first to see the finished pieces. She pulled out a series of watercolor paintings, carefully protected in clear sleeves. Despite myself, I leaned forward to look. They were stunning, abstract interpretations of Boston landmarks, rendered in vibrant blues and greens with splashes of gold. The technique was masterful, showing a level of skill I hadn't seen in Meg's previous work. These are for the hotel lobby? I asked, momentarily setting aside my anger in appreciation of her talent. Meg nodded, a flash of pride crossing her face. 5 in total. They're paying me $12,000 for the series. 12,000? I repeated, genuinely impressed. It was a significant sum, especially for an artist at Meg's career stage. Yes. And I've already told them to make the first check out to you, to cover what I took, plus interest. She met my eyes directly. I'm making this right, Liz. I swear it. I wanted to believe her. The paintings themselves were evidence of her commitment to her craft, and the commission payment would more than cover what she'd stolen. But the breach of trust wasn't something that could be repaired with money alone. Why did you really come here today, Meg? It wasn't just to show me your paintings. She looked down, fidgeting with the edge of one of the protective sleeves. I wanted to see if we could call a truce for Christmas. I know you're still angry. You have every right to be. But I'm terrified of what will happen at the party. If Mom and Dad notice the tension between us, they'll ask questions. I finished for her. Questions you don't want to answer. Questions that will hurt them unnecessarily, she corrected. Look, I've done a terrible thing to you. I'm owning that and making amends. But dragging Mom and Dad into it right now, during their favorite holiday, it just seems cruel. Her logic was frustratingly sound. Revealing the truth now would indeed cast a pall over the Christmas celebrations our parents had been planning for months. But pretending nothing had happened felt equally wrong. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said finally. Just be civil. We don't have to be best friends. We don't even have to talk much. But when we do interact, can we keep it neutral? For their sake? I considered her request, torn between my desire for honesty and my love for our parents. I won't lie if they ask me directly what's wrong, I warned. That's fair, she agreed quickly. Just don't volunteer the information. I sighed, already feeling exhausted at the prospect of this charade. Fine, a Christmas truce. But Meg, this doesn't fix anything between us. You understand that, right? A shadow of sadness crossed her face. I know, but it's a start, isn't it? I didn't answer, instead picking up the croissant and taking a bite to avoid continuing the conversation. Meg seemed to understand, gathering her paintings back into the portfolio with careful hands. I should go, she said, standing. Mom's expecting me back to help with the guest list for the party. I nodded, still chewing. At the door, she paused. Thank you, Liz, for agreeing to the truce, and for not pressing charges. I know I don't deserve your mercy. The simple acknowledgement, that she understood the magnitude of her transgression, and the leniency I'd shown loosened something tight in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of a path toward it. After she left, I finished the croissant and made a cup of my own inferior coffee, mulling over our conversation. The Christmas truce seemed reasonable in theory, but in practice? I wasn't so sure. Emotions had a way of spilling over, especially in the pressure cooker of family gatherings. I found myself wondering what other secrets might be lurking beneath the surface of our seemingly close-knit family. If Meg, artistic, passionate, sometimes irresponsible Meg, could betray me so thoroughly, what else might I not know about? The people I thought I understood completely? The question haunted me for the remainder of the day, an uneasy premonition that the upcoming Christmas party might reveal more than just my sister's theft. Chapter 6. The Eve of Christmas Eve. December 23rd dawned bright and bitterly cold, the kind of New England winter day where the sunlight seems more decorative than functional. I spent the morning finishing work tasks, determined to tie up loose ends before the university's holiday closure. My colleagues were in high spirits, exchanging gifts and planning their celebrations, but I found it difficult to match their enthusiasm. "You're quiet today, Eliza," observed Dr. Kim, my research supervisor, as we reviewed data sets for our ongoing study. "Holiday stress getting to you?" I managed a weak smile. "Something like that." "Family gatherings can be challenging," she said sympathetically. "All those expectations and old dynamics resurfacing." "Exactly," I replied, grateful for her understanding without having to explain the specifics. "How about you? Any plans?" "Just a quiet dinner with my husband and his parents. Nothing too elaborate." She closed her laptop decisively. "I think we've done enough for today. Why don't you head out early? Consider it my Christmas gift to you." The unexpected reprieve gave me a few precious hours of solitude before the family obligations began in earnest. I used the time to wander through the Boston Public Garden, appreciating the snow-draped trees and frozen pond where swan boats would glide in warmer months. The quiet beauty of the winter landscape soothed me, providing a meditative space to prepare mentally for the days ahead. As dusk settled over the city, I made my way to my apartment and found an unexpected package outside my door. No shipping. Label. Just my name in familiar handwriting. Dad's neat, precise script. Curious, I brought it inside and carefully unwrapped the plain brown paper. Inside was a wooden box I recognized immediately, the antique jewelry case that had belonged to my grandmother. My heart quickened as I lifted the lid. Nestled in velvet lay a strand of pearls I remembered from childhood. Grandma Cassidy's prized possession, worn only on special occasions. A note in the box read, "Dearest Eliza, these were meant to be your Christmas gift, but something tells me you might need them a bit early. They've been passed down through generations of Cassidy women, and now they're yours. Whatever is troubling you, and a father knows when something is, remember that you come from a line of strong, resilient women who face their challenges with grace. See you tomorrow. Love, Dad." I held the pearls to the light, tears welling in my eyes. How like my father to sense my distress and respond with such thoughtfulness. The gesture touched me deeply, not just for the value of the gift, but for the silent acknowledgement that he saw my struggle without demanding I explain it. I tried on the pearls, looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. They transformed, my simple sweater and jeans adding an elegance that reminded me of my grandmother, a woman who had survived the Great Depression, raised 4 children largely alone while my grandfather served overseas, and never lost her dignity or kindness. In the face of hardship, would she have approved of my handling of Meg's betrayal? The question lingered as I carefully returned the pearls to their case. I thought she would have understood my hurt, but encouraged reconciliation. Family above all had been her motto. That evening, I received a text from Rebecca. "Everything. Set for tomorrow?" Remember, we're in your corner. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied. Dad sent me Grandma's pearls today. Somehow he knows something's wrong. Of course he does. Parents always know, even when we think we're hiding things well. Her words gave me pause. If Dad had sensed my turmoil, had he also detected Meg's guilt? Were my parents more aware of the situation than I'd given them credit for? I fell asleep that night with the jewelry box on my nightstand, drawing strange comfort from its presence, a tangible link to family history that predated current. Complications. Morning arrived with a light snowfall and a flurry of texts. Mom confirming my arrival time, Alan asking if I needed a ride, Meg with a simple, "Remember our truce." I prepared methodically, packing overnight clothes, staying at my parents' house on Christmas Eve was another Cassidy tradition, wrapping the last few gifts, and finally, placing the strand of pearls around my neck. Whatever the day brought, I would face it with the strength of the women who had worn these pearls before me. The train to Lexington was crowded with last-minute shoppers and fellow holiday travelers. I found a seat by the window and watched the city give way to suburbs, mentally rehearsing how I would interact with Meg. Polite but distant seemed the safest approach, civil enough to avoid raising alarms with our parents, but not so friendly as to suggest I'd forgiven her deception. My father was waiting at the station, his tall figure easily spotted despite the crowd. He smiled broadly when he saw me, opening his arms for a hug. "There's my girl," he said warmly, embracing me. "And wearing the pearls, I see. They suit you." "They're beautiful, Dad. Thank you so much." I held him a moment longer than usual, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Your mother's in full general mode," he said as we walked to the car, directing operations from the kitchen and issuing orders to all available troops. I laughed, picturing the scene. Mom's Christmas preparations were legendary for their military precision. And how many troops has she conscripted this year? Just Meg so far. Alan and the family aren't coming until tomorrow. He glanced at me as he opened the car door. She's been helping quite a bit lately, actually. Seems to be taking more responsibility around the house. Was that a subtle message? Did he know more than he was letting on? "That's good to hear," I said carefully, sliding into the passenger seat. "Yes," he agreed, starting the engine. "Though between you and me, I think something's going on with her. She's been different, more subdued." I stared out the window, unsure how to respond. "Maybe she's just growing up finally." Dad chuckled. "Perhaps. It's about time, don't you think? 25 is a bit old for the struggling artist routine." The comment surprised me. Dad had always been Meg's biggest supporter, encouraging her artistic pursuits even when they seemed impractical. This hint of criticism was unusual. "I thought you believed in her talent," I said. "I do," he replied quickly. "I just worry about her practical side. The real world requires more than talent, as I'm sure you know." I did know. My own career path had been chosen with both passion and practicality in mind. I loved research, but also valued financial stability. "She got a big commission," I found myself saying, "for a hotel downtown. They're paying her well." Dad's face brightened. "She mentioned a potential job but didn't share the details. That's wonderful news. Maybe she is finding her way after all." The rest of the drive passed with safer topics. Dad's recovering health, my work projects, neighborhood gossip about who had the most outrageous Christmas lights display this year. The Hendersons, with their life-sized Santa sleigh and real reindeer imported from a farm in Vermont. When we arrived at the house, the familiar scent of Mom's baking enveloped us as we stepped through the door. Christmas music played softly in the background, Bing Crosby, Dad's favorite, and the living room glowed with the lights of the massive tree. "We're back," Dad called. "Look who I found at the station." Mom emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron, her face lighting up at the sight of me. "Eliza, you're earlier than I expected. And wearing the pearls already." She embraced me tightly, smelling of vanilla and cinnamon. "They were supposed to be a surprise," she added, shooting Dad a mock accusatory look. "She needed them today," Dad said simply, and again I wondered at his perceptiveness. "Well, they look lovely on you. Now come help me with these cookies." Meg's been struggling with the delicate ones. I followed Mom to the kitchen, my stomach tightening at the prospect of seeing Meg. She was at the counter, focused intently on decorating sugar cookies shaped like snowflakes with intricate patterns of royal icing. "Look who's here," Mom announced. Meg looked up, a complicated expression crossing her face. Relief, anxiety, affection. "Hey, Liz, you're just in time to rescue these cookies from my heavy hand." Her tone was light, carefully casual. I nodded in acknowledgement, hanging my coat on the back of a kitchen chair. "They look fine to me." "They're adequate," Mom said, with affectionate criticism. "But yours are always so precise, dear. Why don't you take over the snowflakes and Meg can finish the tree ornaments?" And just like that, we fell into the familiar choreography of Christmas preparations, moving around the kitchen in well-practiced patterns, accepting tasks from Mom, working side by side without needing to interact directly. The truce held, though I felt Meg's eyes on me occasionally, gauging my mood. As afternoon blended into evening, I found myself relaxing despite my resolution to remain on guard. There was something soothing about the routine, about being in my childhood home, with its familiar sights and smells and sounds. Dad put on White Christmas, and I caught myself humming along as I arranged appetizer platters for the next day's party. "That's always been your favorite," Mom observed, pausing in her pie crust rolling. "You used to make us play it in July, remember?" I smiled at the memory. I was a very strange child. "Not strange," Dad corrected from the doorway where he'd appeared with a glass of eggnog. "Particular. You always knew exactly what you wanted and how you wanted it." "Unlike some of us," Meg murmured, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I glanced at her, surprised by the note of envy in her voice. Had she always felt that way? That I was the decisive sister who had it all figured out? If so, she was laboring under a serious misconception. My life might appear orderly from the outside, but inside? I had plenty of doubts and uncertainties. The difference was that I didn't let them derail me. "Who's ready for the annual Christmas Eve movie?" Dad asked, changing the subject. "I've got It's a Wonderful Life queued up and popcorn ready to pop." Another Cassidy tradition, watching the classic film the night before Christmas Eve. Some years I found it corny and predictable, but this year, the story of George Bailey discovering the impact he'd had on others' lives struck a deeper chord. I found myself unexpectedly tearful during the final scenes, which Mom attributed to holiday sentiment, but felt more complicated to me. The evening wound down peacefully enough. Meg retreated to my room early, claiming fatigue from baking all day. Mom and Dad lingered in the living room, discussing last-minute party details, while I helped myself to another cup of Mom's spiced cider and wandered to the back porch. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliantly visible above the suburban darkness. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and exhaled, watching my breath cloud in the frigid air. "Room for company?" I turned to find Dad stepping onto the porch, bundled in his old cardigan. "Always," I replied, making space on the bench. He sat beside me, and for a few minutes we simply enjoyed the quiet together, a rare commodity in the Cassidy household, especially during the holidays. "You know," he said finally, "your mother and I have always tried not to play favorites with you children." The statement, seemingly out of nowhere, caught me off guard. "I know that, Dad. But it's not always easy. Each of you needs different things from us at different times. And sometimes, despite our best intentions, one child requires more attention, more resources." I stayed silent, unsure where he was going with this. "Meg has always been our challenge," he continued. "So much talent, so much heart, but so little direction. From the time she was small, we worried about her more than we worried about you or Alan. That's understandable, I said carefully. Meg's always been more impulsive. Dad chuckled without humor. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. The truth is, your sister has made a lot of mistakes, and your mother and I have often stepped in to help her through the consequences. My heartbeat quickened. Was he about to confirm my suspicions that Meg had taken advantage of our parents as well? Recently, though, we've been trying to step back, he went on, to let her face the results of her choices without our interference. It hasn't been easy, especially for your mother. She wants to protect all of you, always. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Dad turned to look at me directly, his expression serious in the dim light from the kitchen windows. Because I think you're caught in the middle of something with your sister. Something you're trying to handle on your own to protect us. My breath caught. Dad, you don't have to tell me what it is, he interrupted gently. That's between you and Meg. But I want you to know that your mother and I are stronger than you might think. We've weathered a lot of storms in our lives, Eliza. Whatever this is, we can handle it. Tears pricked at my eyes, and I blinked them back. I know you can. But it's Christmas. He smiled, a hint of sadness in it. Yes, it's Christmas. A time for truth as well as celebration, don't you think? Before I could respond, the porch door opened again, and Mom peered out. There you are. It's freezing out here. Come inside before you both catch pneumonia. The moment for confession passed, and Dad gave my hand a quick squeeze before standing. Just think about what I said, he murmured as we followed Mom back into the warmth of the house. That night, lying in the unfamiliar guest room, my childhood, bedroom now being occupied by Meg, I replayed the conversation with Dad. His words suggested he knew, or at least strongly suspected, that something significant had happened between Meg and me. And more importantly, he seemed to be giving me permission to bring it into the open, even if it disrupted the holiday. But could I? Could I bear to see the disappointment on my parents' faces when they learned what their younger daughter had done? Could I handle being the one to deliver that blow? As I drifted toward sleep, my thoughts circled back to the pearls around my neck, symbols of the strength and resilience of Cassidy women before me. Whatever tomorrow brought, I would face it with that same strength. Little did I know that the Christmas Eve party would reveal secrets far beyond Meg's credit card theft, secrets that would shake the foundations of everything I thought I knew about my family. Chapter 7. Christmas Eve morning. I woke early on Christmas Eve, before the rest of the household stirred. The guest room faced east, and winter sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the familiar creaks and settles of my parents' house, sounds that had formed the backdrop of my childhood. Downstairs, the coffee maker gurgled to life on its automatic timer. Dad would be down soon, following his invariable routine of coffee and newspaper before anyone else was up. I decided to join him, slipping into a robe and padding barefoot, down the stairs, careful to avoid the third step that had always squeaked. As expected, Dad was at the kitchen table, reading glasses perched on his nose, focused on his iPad. The digital newspaper having replaced the print version years ago. Despite his initial resistance. "Morning," I said softly. He looked up, smiling. "Early bird. Coffee's fresh." I poured myself a cup and sat across from him, enjoying the comfortable silence. There had always been an easy understanding between us, a similarity of temperament that made words often unnecessary. "Sleep well?" he asked eventually. "Well enough," I replied. "It's strange being in the guest room." "We could shuffle things around if you're staying longer," he offered. "Create a proper space for you." I shook my head. "It's fine for a short visit. I'm not planning to move back home anytime soon, Dad." "Unlike some people," he said with a raised eyebrow. The reference to Meg was unmistakable. "How is that going? Really?" Dad sighed, setting aside his iPad. "It's an adjustment. Your mother enjoys having someone to fuss over, of course. But I'd be lying if I said it hasn't strained things a bit. Our routines are different now. Our budget, too." "Is she contributing?" I asked, thinking of the $12,000 commission Meg had mentioned. "She offers," Dad said diplomatically, "but her income is inconsistent." A familiar frustration rose in me. "Dad, you and Mom are retired. You shouldn't be supporting an adult child." "We're managing," he assured me. "And it's temporary, just until she gets back on her feet after the breakup." I bit my tongue to prevent myself from pointing out that the breakup had happened months ago, and that Meg seemed quite capable of spending substantial sums when they weren't her own. "I worry about you and Mom," I said instead. "You've worked hard for your retirement. You should be enjoying it, not stretching your budget to support Meg." Dad reached across the table to pat my hand. "Your concern is noted, but unnecessary. We're doing what parents do, helping our child through a rough patch." The conversation shifted to safer topics: plans for the day, last-minute party preparations, speculation about whether the promised snowfall would materialize in time to provide a proper Christmas atmosphere, as Mom always insisted. One by one, the rest of the household awakened. Mom appeared next, already dressed and making lists on a notepad. Meg stumbled down last, bleary-eyed and tousled, making a beeline for the coffee pot. "Morning, sunshine," Dad teased her. "Nice of you to join the land of the living." Meg grunted something indecipherable, pouring coffee into the largest mug available. "Not everyone can be an early riser like you two," Mom defended her, though I caught a note of exasperation in her voice. "Meg, once you're caffeinated, I need you to pick up the cheese trays from Dean and DeLuca. They should be ready by 11. "Can't Liz do it?" Meg mumbled, slumping into a chair. "She's already dressed and everything." Mom frowned. "Eliza has been here less than 24 hours. You've had weeks to sleep in. Besides, she's helping me with the cookie platters this morning." I expected Meg to argue, her typical response to being assigned tasks that interfered with her preferred schedule. One by one, the rest of the household awakened. Mom appeared. Next, already dressed and making lists on a notepad. Meg stumbled down last, bleary-eyed and tousled, making a beeline for the coffee pot. "Morning, sunshine," Dad teased her. "Nice of you to join the land of the living." Meg grunted something indecipherable, pouring coffee into the largest mug available. "Not everyone can be an early riser like you two," Mom defended her, though I caught a note of exasperation in her voice. "Meg, once you're caffeinated, I need you to pick up the cheese trays from Dean and DeLuca. They should be ready by 11. "Can't Liz do it?" Meg mumbled, slumping into a chair. "She's already dressed and everything." Mom frowned. "Eliza has been here less than 24 hours. You've had weeks to sleep in. Besides, she's helping me with the cookie platters this morning." I expected Meg to argue, her typical response to being assigned tasks that interfered with her preferred schedule. Instead, she just sighed, nodded, and took another long sip of coffee. Something about that small surrender struck me as odd. The Meg I remembered would have pushed back, negotiated, or at least complained more colorfully. "I'll go with her," I offered, feeling a sudden need to connect with my sister. 2 pairs of hands to carry everything. Mom looked surprised but pleased. "That would be helpful, actually. The order's quite large." Dad folded his newspaper and set it aside. "I'll tackle the living room furniture. Claire wants everything. Rearrange to maximize mingling space. Don't forget to leave room by the bay window for the quartet," Mom reminded him. "Quartet?" I echoed. "String quartet," Meg clarified, her voice still rough with sleep. "Mom hired Peter Kim's ensemble from Juilliard. Very fancy." "It's not every day we host the annual neighbor party," Mom said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. And this year's extra special with both girls home. I felt a twinge of guilt at the both girls home comment. How many of these annual parties had I missed? 3? 4? The gathering had started when I was in high school. Mom and Dad's way of thanking neighbors who'd helped during Dad's recovery from heart surgery. It had grown each year, becoming a neighborhood tradition that marked the beginning of the holiday season. I'm looking forward to it, I said, meaning it. Being away had made me appreciate these family rituals more, not less. Dad checked his watch. Almost 8. I'd better get started on that furniture before your mother's clipboard comes out. Mom swatted his arm playfully. My clipboard keeps this family functioning. James Harrison, and you know it. Never denied it, dear, he replied, kissing her cheek as he stood. Just trying to stay one step ahead of it. I watched their easy affection with a mixture of comfort and longing. 28 years of marriage, and they still had this warmth between them. Was that what I was missing in my own relationships? That foundation of friendship beneath the romance? The kitchen settled into a rhythm after Dad left. Mom pulled, out mixing bowls while I gathered ingredients for the cookie dough. Meg nursed her coffee, scrolling through her phone with the intensity of someone avoiding eye contact. So, I ventured, measuring flour into a bowl. How's the writing going? Mom mentioned you've been working on something new. Meg looked up, surprise flickering across her face. It's going. Working on a collection of linked short stories. About? She hesitated. Women in transition. Different ages, different circumstances, but all at inflection points in their lives. Sounds interesting? I meant it. Meg had always been the family wordsmith, turning in short stories for school assignments when everyone else wrote basic essays. What inspired that? A complicated expression crossed her face. Life, I guess. People aren't static. We're all constantly becoming something else, whether we acknowledge it or not. Mom glanced between us, then busied herself with butter and sugar in the mixer. Are you still with The Atlantic? I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. Freelancing now, actually. Left the staff position in September. This was news. To me. Oh, was that a planned change or, let's call it a mutual parting of ways? Meg's tone suggested there was more to the story. I wanted more creative flexibility. They wanted someone who'd focus on political analysis. Their loss, Mom interjected loyally. Meg's fiction is far more compelling than any political commentary. I noticed Meg didn't quite meet Mom's eyes at the compliment. Another small change from the sister I remembered, who had always basked in parental praise. The mixer whirred to life, momentarily filling the kitchen with noise. I used the interruption to study Meg more carefully. Beyond the morning dishevelment, there was something different about her. A guardedness that hadn't been there before. The sister I'd grown up with had been an open book, emotions visible on her face, thoughts spilling from her mouth almost faster than they formed in her mind. This Meg seemed more contained, more careful. When had that happened? And why hadn't I noticed until now? What about you, Liz? Meg asked when the mixer stopped. Still saving the world one PowerPoint at a time? I recognized the deflection tactic but let it slide. Something like that, though lately it's been more Zoom meetings than PowerPoints. Must be exciting, jetting around to all those glamorous global development hotspots. There was a hint of the old Meg in her teasing tone. Yes, the mud roads of rural Cambodia are very glamorous, almost as glamorous as the power outages in Mozambique. Mom smiled as she added vanilla to the mixing bowl. Your sister's being modest, Meg. Her last project got written up in that development journal. What was it called, Eliza? Global Development Quarterly, I said, feeling strangely embarrassed. It wasn't a big piece, just a case study on our community banking initiative. Still, Mom persisted, it's important work. making a difference in people's lives. I caught a flash of something in Meg's expression, not quite resentment, but something adjacent to it. The old familiar dynamic reasserting itself. Eliza the achiever, Meg the creative but less practical one. I'd always hated that characterization, even when it benefited me. Meg's work makes a difference too, I said firmly. Good writing helps. People understand each other better. The world needs that just as much as economic development. Surprise registered on both their faces. Mom's because I was contradicting her implied hierarchy, Meg's because I was defending her. Had I really been so dismissive of her career in the past that this simple statement came as a shock? The moment passed, but something in the kitchen's atmosphere had shifted. Mom returned to her cookie dough while Meg drained her coffee cup and stood. "I'm going to shower before Dean and DeLuca," she announced. "What time do you want to leave, Liz?" "Whenever you're ready. I'm just helping Mom with these cookies first." Meg nodded and left, her footsteps on the stairs oddly deliberate, as if she was concentrating on each step. When she was gone, Mom turned to me with a concerned expression. "I'm glad you're going with her," she said quietly. She could use someone to talk to. "Is something wrong?" I asked, lowering my voice to match hers. Mom sighed, setting aside her mixing spoon. "Nothing specific. She's just been different, quieter, more withdrawn. I thought it might be the breakup with Kyle, but that was months ago now." "Breakup?" This was the first I'd heard of it. I thought they were getting serious. So did we all, including Meg. Then suddenly he was taking a job in Seattle and didn't want to do long distance. Poor Meg was blindsided. I felt a surge of protective anger. He didn't even try to make it work? Apparently not. Meg doesn't talk about it much. You know how she is. Uses humor to deflect when things get too personal. I did know. It was a family trait, one I'd inherited as well, though my deflection method of choice was changing the subject rather than making jokes. "How long were they together?" I asked. "Almost 2 years. Your father and I thought, well, it doesn't matter what we thought." Mom returned to her mixing with unusual vigor. "Anyway, she hasn't been herself since. Hardly goes out, works all hours. The only reason she's been home these past weeks is that her sublet ended and she hasn't found a new place yet." This was all news to me. Meg and I texted occasionally, but our conversations rarely went deeper than surface updates and funny anecdotes. When had we stopped really talking to each other? "I'll try to get her to open up," I promised, though I wasn't sure how successful I'd be. The distance between us suddenly felt much greater than the thousands of physical miles that had separated us these past years. Mom nodded gratefully. "Just be gentle about it. She's more fragile than she lets on." We finished the cookie preparation in companionable silence, falling into the familiar rhythm of baking together. By 10:30, 4 dozen perfectly shaped cookies were cooling on racks, and Meg reappeared dressed in jeans and a sweater, her wet hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. "Ready when you are," she announced, seeming more alert now. "Dad said we can take his car since it has more trunk space." I washed flour from my hands and grabbed my coat. "Let's go rescue some cheese." The drive to Dean and DeLuca was quiet at first. Meg focused on navigating the suburban streets, while I tried to think of a natural way to broach more personal topics. The familiarity of the neighborhood struck me. How little had changed in the years I'd been away. The same stately homes with their manicured lawns, the same local shops along Main Street, even the same holiday decorations appearing in windows and doorways. Yet despite this external constancy, so much had shifted within our family dynamics. "So," I finally ventured as we stopped at a red light, "Mom mentioned you're between apartments right now. Any leads on a new place?" Meg's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "A few. There's a promising studio in Fort Greene. Tiny, but it has good light for writing." "Fort Greene? I thought you loved the Upper West Side." "I did. Can't afford it anymore without a steady paycheck. The light changed, and she accelerated perhaps a bit more forcefully than necessary. Is the freelancing not going well? I asked carefully. Meg sighed. It's fine, just different. Feast or famine, you know? Some months I'm turning down assignments, others I'm scrambling for work. That must be stressful. It's worth it for the freedom. She glanced at me briefly. Not everyone wants the security of a big organization behind them, Liz. I heard the defensive edge in her voice and backpedaled. I didn't mean it that way. I think it's brave, actually. I'm not sure I could handle that kind of uncertainty. Her expression softened slightly. Sorry, that came out sharper than I intended. I'm a bit sensitive about career choices lately. Mom and Dad mean well, but they worry, I finished for her. And their worry feels like judgment. Exactly. She looked surprised at my understanding. How did you know? I laughed softly. Remember when I turned down that consulting job after grad school to work for a nonprofit instead? Dad didn't sleep for a week. Oh, God, yes. He kept leaving employment statistics on the kitchen counter. And printouts about student loan repayment schedules. We both chuckled, and some of the tension between us eased. This was familiar territory, commiserating about our well-intentioned but sometimes overbearing parents. At least your career choice has moral superiority, Meg said after a moment. Hard to argue with I'm helping impoverished communities develop sustainable economies. Trust me, they find ways. But Eliza, wouldn't you have more impact working within the system? Think of the connections you could make at Goldman Sachs. Meg laughed genuinely this time. That's Dad's voice exactly. We pulled into the shopping center where Dean and DeLuca was located. The parking lot was crowded with last-minute Thanksgiving shoppers and others like us, picking up catering orders for weekend events. Meg circled twice before finding a spot at the far end. So, she said as she turned off the engine, how long are you staying this time? Mom's been vague about your departure date. Because I've been vague with her, I admitted. I have some flexibility for once, at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. Meg raised her eyebrows. Seriously? You're usually rushing back after 5 days, claiming some urgent crisis needs your attention. Things are different this time. Didn't elaborate, not ready to explain exactly how different. Anyway, I thought it might be nice to have a proper visit for once. Well, don't expect non-stop excitement. My life consists mainly of writing until my eyes blur, then watching British baking shows until I fall asleep. Sounds perfect, actually. She studied me curiously. You're not bored out of your mind at home? No itching to check your email or hop on a call with Bangkok? I shook my head. Not this time. It was true, surprisingly. The usual restlessness I felt when away from work hadn't materialized yet. Instead, being home felt like slipping into a warm bath, comfortable in a way I hadn't anticipated. We got out of the car and walked across the parking lot side by side. Just before reaching the store, Meg stopped suddenly. Kyle's engaged, she said, the words coming out in a rush. To his co-worker in Seattle. The one he swore was just a friend when I asked why he was texting her at midnight. The revelation hung in the crisp November air between us. I turned to face her, seeing the hurt she'd been masking all morning. Oh, Meg, that's awful. When did you find out? Instagram, 3 weeks ago. She tried for a casual shrug that didn't quite come off. 6 months after we broke up. Must have been some whirlwind romance, or an affair that had started while they were still together. I kept that thought to myself. I'm so sorry, I said, meaning it deeply. No wonder you've been what? Her tone sharpened again. I was going to say distracted. Mom's worried about you. Meg rolled her eyes. Mom's always worried about me. I'm fine. It's ancient history. She started walking again, more briskly now. Let's get this cheese before Mom sends out a search party. I followed, recognizing the defensive retreat. It was exactly what I would have done in her place. Change the subject, pick up the pace, avoid the emotional quicksand. We were more alike than either of us usually acknowledged. Inside Dean and DeLuca, the atmosphere was controlled chaos. Well-dressed, staff moved efficiently behind gleaming counters, but the customer area was crowded with people gesturing emphatically over displays of imported cheeses and artisanal breads. The air smelled of coffee, truffle oil, and the particular anxiety of affluent people preparing to entertain. We joined the line at the catering counter, where a harried-looking woman checked names off a list as she distributed large white bags and boxes. When our turn came, we gave Mom's name and watched as 4 substantial boxes were assembled on the counter. Harrison Party, 4 cheese and charcuterie platters, serves 60, the woman confirmed, checking her list. That'll be $487.62. I tried not to visibly react to the price as I handed over Mom's credit card, nearly $500 for cheese and meat. The annual neighbor party had definitely evolved since my high school days when it was potluck casseroles and Dad's questionable mulled wine. As we carried the boxes to the car, I asked, "Has the party gotten bigger or just fancier?" "Both," Meg replied, struggling slightly with her load. "Last year there were at least 80 people. Mom's invited the entire block plus Dad's colleagues, from the university and her garden club friends. What happened to the casual gathering I remember? Keeping up with the Joneses, or in this case the Whitmans, who hosted that ridiculous charity gala last month. Mom's been in competitive hostess mode ever since?" I frowned, trying to reconcile this image with my practical, down-to-earth mother. That doesn't sound like Mom. "You've been gone a long time, Liz," Meg said, a hint of something, accusation, regret, in her voice. "Things change." I had no response to that. We loaded the boxes into the trunk and drove home in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The brief connection we'd established earlier seemed to have evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of how much ground had been lost between us. Back at the house, the transformation was well underway. Dad had rearranged the living room furniture as directed, creating conversational groupings and a clear path to the dining room where elaborate buffet tables were being set up. Mom darted between rooms, checking items off her clipboard list and issuing instructions to Dad and 2 college-aged helpers she'd hired for the event. "Perfect timing," she called when she saw us coming through the door with the cheese boxes. "Put them in the refrigerator for now. The caterers are arriving at 4 to set everything up." "Caterers?" I echoed. "I thought we were doing the food ourselves. Just the cookies and a few family specialties," Mom explained. "The main spread is being handled by that new place in town, Sage and Thyme. They did the Wilsons' anniversary party last month and everyone raved about it." I exchanged a look with Meg, who gave me a silent, "I told you so" expression. "Sounds great," I said, forcing enthusiasm. "How can we help now?" Mom consulted her clipboard. "The florist is delivering centerpieces at noon. Meg, would you check those against the order when they arrive? I want to make sure they got the color palette right. Eliza, the good crystal, needs to be washed. It's gotten dusty in the cabinet." We nodded and dispersed to our assigned tasks. As I carefully removed delicate wine glasses from the dining room cabinet, I found myself cataloging other changes around the house. New artwork on the walls. A different color scheme in the living room. The familiar family photos rearranged and reframed. Small shifts that collectively created the impression of subtle but significant evolution in my absence. Had I really been so disconnected from home these past years? I'd always prided myself on staying in touch despite the distance. Regular video calls with Mom and Dad, text exchanges with Meg, keeping up with family news. But standing in my childhood home, I realized how superficial that connection had been. I knew the broad strokes but had missed the nuances, the gradual shifts in family dynamics, the subtle changes in relationships, the new rituals and habits that had formed without me. The recognition left me feeling unmoored, if I'd missed so. Much here, in the place I still thought of as home. What else had I been missing by keeping myself so constantly in motion? I was still contemplating this when the doorbell rang, announcing the flower delivery. Meg went to receive them while I finished with the crystal. Minutes later, I heard her voice raised in frustration. "No, these aren't right at all. The order specified burgundy and deep purple with copper accents. These are pink and lavender." I walked to the foyer to find Meg facing off with a nervous-looking delivery person surrounded by flower arrangements that did, indeed, look nothing like what Mom would have ordered. "There must be some mistake," the young man was saying, checking his clipboard. "I'm just delivering what's on the order form." "Well, your order form is wrong," Meg insisted. "My mother was very specific about the color scheme. These won't work at all." Mom appeared from the kitchen, alerted by the commotion. "What's happening?" she asked, then stopped short when she saw the flowers. "Oh dear. They sent the wrong arrangements," Meg explained, still glaring at the delivery person. "Completely wrong colors." Mom examined the flowers, her expression shifting from dismay to resignation. "It's too late to reorder. The party's tomorrow evening." "Maybe we could call some other florists," I suggested. "See if anyone could do something last minute. On Thanksgiving weekend? Unlikely." Mom sighed deeply. "We'll just have to make do." The delivery person, sensing a resolution that didn't involve returning with all the flowers, quickly had Mom sign for the delivery and beat a hasty retreat. "This is ridiculous," Meg fumed after he left. "You paid a fortune for these arrangements. They should be exactly what you ordered." "It's fine, Margaret," Mom said, using Meg's full name as she always did when trying to diffuse a situation. "They're still beautiful flowers, just not the colors I envisioned. No one will notice." "You'll notice," Meg persisted. "Every time you look at them, you'll see the wrong colors." Mom's smile was tired but genuine. "Then I'll practice the art of lowering expectations, something I've become quite good at over the years." There was a weight to her words that made both Meg and me look at her more closely. Was she referring to something specific, or just making a general comment about life's disappointments? Before either of us could ask, Dad entered carrying a large box of string lights. "Claire, where do you want these hung? Outside on the porch, or—" He stopped when he saw the tense tableau in the foyer. "What's wrong?" "Nothing important," Mom said quickly. "Just a small mix-up with the flowers. The lights should go along the porch railing and around the front door, please." Dad hesitated, looking between the three of us, then nodded and retreated with the lights. Mom turned back to the flower arrangements. "Let's put 2 in the living room, 1 in the foyer, and 1 on the dining room buffet," she directed, her party planning persona firmly back in place. "Meg, could you help me move them?" "Eliza, if you've finished with the crystal, the good silver needs polishing." We dispersed to our tasks again, the moment of tension dissipating but not forgotten. As I sat at the kitchen table polishing silverware, that was only used for special occasions, I found myself thinking about Mom's comment about lowered expectations. It stirred something uncomfortable in me. A recognition that perhaps my perpetual motion, my constant seeking of the next project, the next country, the next challenge, was its own form of expectation management. If I never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots, I never had to face the disappointment of those roots not taking hold the way I hoped. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of party preparations. By evening, the house had been transformed from comfortable family home to elegant entertainment space. Every surface gleamed, crystal sparkled, and despite the color discrepancy, the flower arrangements added a festive touch to each room. Over a simple dinner of leftovers eaten at the kitchen counter, the dining room now being too pristine to disturb, Mom reviewed the final details for the following day. The quartet arrives at 6 to set up. Caterers at 4. Bar service at 5:30. First guests should arrive around 7. She checked items off on her ever-present clipboard. James, did you pick up your suit from the dry cleaners? Dad nodded, mouth full of leftover lasagna. Girls, I've hung your dresses in your closets. Eliza, I hope the blue one still fits. It should. You're still as slim as ever. Meg, I bought you a new one. Nothing too fancy, just a simple black cocktail dress I saw at Nordstrom. I thought it would suit you. Meg looked up from her plate. You didn't have to do that, Mom. I wanted to. Consider it an early Christmas present. I watched this exchange carefully, noting the slight tension in Meg's shoulders. Was she bothered by Mom buying her clothes, as if she couldn't manage herself? Or was there something else underlying her discomfort? That was thoughtful, I said, trying to smooth whatever ruffled feathers might be lurking. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. It's been ages since I've caught up with the neighbors. They're looking forward to seeing you too, Mom said. Everyone asks about you whenever they see me. How's Eliza doing with her global adventures? They're all very impressed with your work. I smiled, though I felt a familiar discomfort at being the subject of neighborhood admiration, especially when sitting next to Meg, who never seemed to receive the same level of public interest despite her own accomplishments. Well, they'll have plenty of time to hear boring development stories tomorrow, I said lightly. I'll try not to put anyone to sleep. Never boring, Dad interjected, having finished his lasagna. Our globe-trotting daughter, though we certainly wouldn't complain if some of that trotting brought you closer to home more often. There it was, the gentle but persistent reminder that my life choices, while respected, still represented a form of absence in their eyes. An incomplete family picture. Actually, I began, then hesitated. Was this the right moment? I hadn't planned to have this conversation over kitchen counter leftovers. I might be around more in the coming year. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on me with varying degrees of surprise. What do you mean? Mom asked, setting down her clipboard, entirely. A sure sign I had her full attention. I took a deep breath. I'm considering a position with the New York office. Still with the foundation, but based here rather than overseas. Silence greeted this announcement. Then Dad broke into a wide smile. That's wonderful news, Eliza. What prompted this change? I picked at my food, suddenly less hungry. A few things. The foundation is shifting focus more toward policy and less toward field implementation. And I've been thinking lately that it might be nice to settle a bit, put down some roots. Well, I think it's an excellent decision, Mom said, her tone carefully modulated as if afraid too much enthusiasm might scare me off. It would be lovely to have you closer to home. I glanced at Meg, who had been conspicuously quiet. Her expression was unreadable. What about you, Meg? Any thoughts? I prompted. She shrugged, pushing her plate away. Sounds great. The prodigal daughter returns. There was an edge to her voice that made Mom frown. Margaret, that's hardly... It's fine, I interrupted, not wanting to create tension. I haven't made any final decisions yet, just exploring options. The conversation shifted to safer topics after that, but I kept glancing at Meg, trying to decipher her reaction. Had I imagined the note of resentment in her voice? And if not, what exactly was she resentful of? My potential return, or the way our parents had responded to it? After dinner, we all dispersed to our rooms, exhausted from the day's preparations and anticipating the busy day ahead. In my childhood bedroom, now converted to a tasteful guest room that still contained echoes of my youth, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to make sense of the undercurrents I'd been feeling since my arrival. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael, my colleague, and more, in Cambodia. How's the family reunion going? Missing you here. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could I explain the complex emotions of being home? The comfort, mixed with disorientation, the love intertwined with guilt, the sense of belonging overlaid with awareness of how much I'd missed. All good, I typed back. Talk tomorrow? It was non-committal, but not dishonest. His reply came quickly. Looking forward to it. Sleep well. I set the phone aside and changed into pajamas, my mind still turning over the day's interactions. Just as I was getting into bed, there was a soft knock at my door. Come in, I called. The door opened to reveal Meg, also in pajamas, holding 2 mugs of something steaming. Peace offering, she said, extending one mug toward me. Hot chocolate with the tiny marshmallows, just like when we were kids. The gesture was so unexpected and sweet that I felt a sudden tightness in my throat. Thanks, I managed, taking the mug. Come sit. She perched on the edge of the bed beside me, both of us cradling our mugs in silence for a moment. I'm sorry about earlier, she finally said. When you mentioned moving back, I didn't mean to sound, however I sounded, unenthusiastic. I suggested gently. That's one word for it. She took a sip of her hot chocolate. It's not that I don't want you closer. I do. It's just complicated, I finished for her. Yeah. She gave me a grateful look for understanding. When you're away, you're this perfect daughter who's off saving the world. No one sees your flaws or mistakes because you're not here to make them. It creates a certain standard. I nodded slowly, beginning to understand. A standard you feel measured against. Every single day. Her voice was quiet, but intense. Do you know what it's like being the daughter who stayed? The one who's here for every family dinner, every crisis, every boring Tuesday? The one whose struggles happen in full view, while yours are conveniently distant? I hadn't thought of it that way before, how my absence might have cast a kind of golden light over my imperfections while magnifying hers, how my occasional heroic returns might have contrasted with her constant, less remarkable presence. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I never meant to create that dynamic. It's not your fault. Not entirely, anyway. She attempted a smile. You did choose to move thousands of miles away while I chose to live 30 minutes from our parents. That's on me. Why did you stay so close? I'd never actually asked her this before, I realized with a pang of guilt. Meg was quiet for a long moment, staring into her mug. Lots of reasons. My job was here, my friends, and… She hesitated. Mom and Dad need someone nearby. You know Dad's heart isn't great. And Mom pretends to be Superwoman, but she gets overwhelmed. Someone needs to be the reliable one. The implication hung between us, and that someone couldn't be me because I was too busy being the adventurous one. I should have been more present, I acknowledged. Even from a distance. Maybe. But that's who you are, Liz. Always moving forward, eyes on the horizon. I used to be jealous of that. Your absolute certainty about what you wanted and your willingness to go after it no matter what. And now? She shrugged. Now I realize we all pay different prices for the lives we choose. Your freedom comes with distance. My proximity comes with scrutiny. We sipped our hot chocolate in thoughtful silence. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, possibly since college. So if I move back, I ventured, would that make things better or worse between us? Meg considered this. Both, probably. Better because I've missed you. Worse because we'd have to figure out new roles. She gave me a sideways glance. Also, fair warning. If you live nearby, Mom will try to fix your love life. It's what she does when she has regular access to you. I laughed softly. She still does that with you? Constantly. Every eligible man within a 50-mile radius has been subtly or not so subtly suggested as a potential match. Her smile faded. It got worse after Kyle. I think she's afraid I'll die alone surrounded by cats and unfinished manuscripts. Would that be so terrible? I teased. The cats or the manuscripts? Either. Both. She chuckled. I could think of worse fates. After a moment, she added more seriously, "What about you? Anyone special in Cambodia? You've been pretty vague in your emails." I hesitated, not ready to get into the complicated situation with Michael. "It's evolving. Distance makes things difficult." "Tell me about it," she muttered, then clarified. "Not that I'm dating anyone long distance, or short distance, or any distance at all right now." "Kyle really did a number on you, huh?" Her expression closed off slightly. "It's not just him, it's everything. My career transition, the apartment situation, turning 30 next year and feeling like I've accomplished exactly none of the things I thought I would by this age." She shook her head. "Sorry, that got dark fast." "Don't apologize, I get it." And I did, more than she knew. My seemingly purposeful life had its own undercurrents of doubt and uncertainty. "For what it's worth, I think you're being too hard on yourself. You're a published writer with a growing portfolio. You have the courage to freelance instead of staying in a staff job that wasn't fulfilling you. That's not nothing." She looked genuinely surprised by my assessment. "Thanks. That actually means a lot coming from you." "Why wouldn't I think that?" "Because you're Eliza Harrison, global do-gooder with the perfect resume and the perfect life." I laughed, the sound sharper than I'd intended. "Oh, Meg, if you only knew how imperfect it all is. The bureaucracy, the frustration of working within systems that are fundamentally broken. The relationships that never last because I'm always leaving for the next assignment." She studied me with new interest. "Is that why you're considering moving back? Relationship issues?" "Partly," I admitted. "But also just fatigue, I guess, with always being the outsider, the temporary presence, never fully belonging anywhere." "You belong here," she said quietly. "You always have, even when you're away." The simple statement, delivered without drama, brought tears to my eyes. I blinked them away, embarrassed by my sudden emotion. "Anyway," Meg continued, seeing my discomfort, "if you do move back, dibs on not telling Mom you're dating someone inappropriate. I've filled that role for years and could use a break." I laughed, grateful for the shift to lighter territory. "Define inappropriate. Are we talking different political party inappropriate or criminal record inappropriate? In Mom's hierarchy? Same thing." Meg grinned. "But I was thinking more like tattoo artist, or musician, or, God forbid, someone without a graduate degree." "The horror!" I pressed a hand to my chest in mock scandal. "I'll be sure to date exclusively boring consultants and accountants if I move back. For the family honor." "Much appreciated." She drained the last of her hot chocolate. "Though I will say, Mom's been better about that stuff lately. I think Dad's been working on her." "Really? This is the woman who once did a background check on your prom date." "She's evolving, slowly, like those fish that grew legs over millions of years." We both snickered, falling into the rhythm of sisterly banter that had once been so natural between us. It felt good, this reconnection, even if it was tentative and laced with the complicated emotions of adulthood. Meg stood, gathering our empty mugs. "I should let you get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be chaos." "Thanks for the hot chocolate. And the talk." She paused at the door. "We should do it more often. The talking part, I mean." "I'd like that." After she left, I settled into bed, feeling lighter than I had since arriving home. The distance between us hadn't disappeared, but at least we had acknowledged it, the first step toward bridging it. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that this, as much as any career opportunity, was a compelling reason to consider moving back. The chance to rebuild what had been lost between us during my years of absence. Morning arrived with the sound of activity already underway downstairs. I checked my phone, 7:45 a.m., and found a text from Michael sent hours earlier. "Missing our breakfast conversations. Hope the family party goes well. I smiled at the message but set the phone aside without responding. There would be time for that conversation later. Today belonged to the Harrisons and their elaborate neighborhood gathering. When I made it, downstairs, the kitchen was a flurry of activity. Mom stood at the island, directing operations with clipboard in hand. Dad sat at the counter sipping coffee and staying strategically out of the way. Meg was nowhere to be seen. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Mom greeted me. "Coffee's fresh. Help yourself to breakfast. There's quiche in the oven keeping warm." "Thanks," I mumbled, making a beeline for the coffee pot. "Where's Meg?" "Last-minute errand," Dad explained. The bakery called. Something about the wrong desserts being prepared. "Your mother nearly had a conniption." Mom frowned at him. "I did not have a conniption, James. I simply expressed concern that the tart tatons we ordered had been replaced with apple pies. It's not the same thing at all." "Of course not, dear." Dad winked at me behind Mom's back. I poured coffee and assessed the situation. "What can I do to help?" Mom consulted her clipboard. "The dining room tables need their linens, and then we'll set them for the buffet. The caterers are bringing most of the serving pieces, but we'll use our platters for the desserts and cheese." I nodded, taking a quick bite of quiche before diving into the tasks. For the next several hours, we worked steadily to transform the house into the elegant, entertaining space Mom envisioned. Meg returned with the corrected desserts, and we all continued with preparations, hanging decorations, arranging furniture, setting up the bar area. By 3 o'clock, everything was nearly ready. Mom sent us to get dressed while she waited for the caterers to arrive. In my room, I found the blue dress she had mentioned hanging in the closet, a sophisticated sheath I'd worn to a foundation gala 2 years earlier. I was surprised she had kept it, but also touched by the gesture. I showered and dressed carefully, applying more makeup than my usual minimal approach. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself in the elegant woman reflected back at me. In Cambodia, I lived in practical clothing suited to field visits and casual offices. Dressing up was a rare occurrence, usually reserved for donor meetings or the occasional embassy function. There was a knock at my door as I was fastening small pearl earrings, a gift from my parents on my college graduation. "Come in," I called. Meg entered, already dressed in the black cocktail dress Mom had bought her. It fit her perfectly, highlighting her more graceful figure while downplaying the slight weight she had gained since I'd last seen her. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, and she wore makeup that enhanced her features without being obvious. "Wow," I said sincerely. "You look amazing." She smoothed the dress self-consciously. "Thanks, you too. Blue was always your color." I finished with my earrings and turned to face her fully. "Is it weird that I'm nervous? It's just the neighbors. And Dad's university colleagues. And Mom's garden club friends. And probably half the town council." Meg smirked. "But no pressure." "Thanks for the reassurance," I said dryly. "Seriously, though, you'll be fine. Everyone will be thrilled to see the prodigal daughter home from saving the world." There was no bite in her tone this time, just wry acknowledgement of the dynamic we'd discussed the night before. I studied her, wondering if I should address it again, but she waved a dismissive hand. "It's fine, really. I'm used to it. And tonight's about making Mom happy. She's been planning this party for months." "Has she always been this intense about entertaining?" I asked, remembering our conversation from the previous day. Meg considered this. "Not always. It's gotten more elaborate each year. I think it's her way of staying connected to the community now that she's retired. It gives her a project to focus on." I hadn't thought of it that way. There's a lot you haven't seen, being away. The words could have been accusatory, but Meg's tone was matter-of-fact. It's been an adjustment for them, getting older. Dad's heart scare last year really shook Mom up. "Heart scare?" I straightened, alarmed. "What heart scare?" "Nobody told Me about any heart scare? Meg's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. They didn't tell you? Dad had some irregular heartbeat issues last December. Spent 2 nights in the hospital. It wasn't a heart attack, but it was concerning enough that they adjusted his medications. No, they definitely did not tell me that. I felt a surge of hurt and worry. Why wouldn't they mention something so important? Meg sighed. Probably because they knew you'd worry and wouldn't be able to do anything from halfway around the world. Mom's protective that way, of all of us. The realization that my parents had shielded me from significant family health news was unsettling. What else had been deemed too worrisome to share with their distant daughter? How many other family developments had been filtered or omitted in our regular but superficial communications? I should have been told, I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. I could have come home. And they knew you would feel that way, which is exactly why they didn't tell you. Meg's voice was gentle but firm. Your work is important, Liz. They didn't want to disrupt it for something that turned out to be manageable. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, my excitement about the evening temporarily forgotten. I feel like I don't even know what's been happening in my own family. Meg joined me, careful not to wrinkle her dress. That's the trade-off, isn't it? You can't be everywhere at once. You chose to be there instead of here. It doesn't make you a bad daughter. It just means you made a choice. A choice that left all the family responsibilities to you, I said, the realization hitting me fully for the first time. She shrugged. Someone had to be here. But it shouldn't have had to be only you. Maybe not. But that's how it worked. Out. She stood, smoothing her dress again. Anyway, this isn't the time for family therapy. Mom will have an actual conniption if we're not downstairs in 5 minutes looking festive and ready to charm the neighbors. I nodded, pushing aside the complicated emotions for later examination. She was right. Tonight was about Mom's party, not our family dynamics. I applied a final touch of lipstick and followed Meg downstairs, where the transformation was complete. The house glowed with warm lighting. Flowers, the wrong colors but beautiful nonetheless, adorned every surface. The caterers moved efficiently through the space, setting up elegant displays of food. A young man in formal attire was arranging bottles at the bar station. Through the window, I could see the string quartet setting up in the corner of the living room. Mom spotted us descending the stairs and beamed. "Don't you both look lovely?" she said, coming to meet us. She was elegant in a deep green dress that flattered her still youthful figure, her silver hair arranged in a sophisticated style I hadn't seen before. "You too, Mom," I said, meaning it. "The house looks incredible." "Everything seems to be on schedule for once," she said, sounding pleased but not yet relaxed. "The first guest should be arriving in about 30 minutes. James!" she called to Dad, who emerged from his study looking distinguished in his suit. "Don't the girls look beautiful?" Dad regarded us with obvious pride. "The most beautiful women in the room, as always." "Technically, we're the only women in the room right now," Meg pointed out with a smirk. "A mere detail," Dad replied, unperturbed. "My statement stands." Mom checked her watch. "James, could you open the wine to let it breathe? Girls, please, do a final check of the guest bathrooms to make sure they're spotless." We dispersed to our assignments, falling into the familiar pattern of following Mom's directives. As Meg and I inspected the downstairs bathroom, making sure hand towels were perfectly aligned and decorative soaps arranged just so, I whispered, "Has she always been this perfectionist about parties?" "Only since Pinterest was invented," Meg whispered back. "Every event has to be social media worthy now, even though Mom doesn't actually post anything on social media." I chuckled, then sobered. "I'm still processing the fact that nobody told me about Dad's heart issues." Meg's expression softened. "I really thought you knew. I'm sorry." "Not your responsibility," I assured her. "Just a lot to take in." She nodded, but didn't have time to respond further as Mom's voice called out for our help with a last-minute flower adjustment. The moment for deeper conversation passed as we were swept into final preparations. Right on schedule, the doorbell rang at 6:55 p.m., announcing the first arrivals. Mom took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and transformed into the perfect hostess before our eyes. Dad took his position beside her, and Meg and I flanked them as they opened the door to welcome their guests. What followed was a whirlwind of introductions, exclamations, and conversation. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years embraced me warmly, marveling at my return as if I'd been on an expedition to Mars rather than working in developing countries. Dad's colleagues peppered me with questions about global economic development, while Mom's garden club friends wanted to know if I'd encountered any exotic plants in my travels. I fell into the role of returning daughter with practiced ease, sharing sanitized anecdotes about my work abroad and deflecting more personal questions, with polite vagueness. Throughout it all, I kept an eye on Meg, who moved through the growing crowd with a grace I envied. Her writer's observation skills evident in how she recalled details about each guest's family or work. By 8 o'clock, the house was filled, with the pleasant hum of conversation, punctuated by laughter and the elegant strains of the string quartet. The catered food was indeed impressive, elaborately presented small bites that looked like they belonged in a food magazine. The bar was busy, with the young bartender mixing cocktails with professional flair. I was cornered near the fireplace by Mrs. Whitman, our neighbor whose charity gala had apparently inspired Mom's competitive spirit, when I spotted a familiar face entering the living room. "Excuse me?" I said to Mrs. Whitman, my heart suddenly racing. "I see someone I need to greet." I made my way across the room to where David Chen stood awkwardly by the entrance, looking as handsome and uncomfortable in formal wear as he had in high school. "David," I said, surprising myself with how breathless I sounded. "I didn't know you'd be here." He turned, his expression shifting from polite neutrality to genuine pleasure when he recognized me. "Eliza, your mom said you might be home for the holidays, but I wasn't sure if that included tonight." "Last-minute trip," I explained, taking in the sight of him. David had been my closest friend throughout high school, and briefly, something more during college before our paths diverged. He looked older now, of course, but in the best possible way. The gangly boy had become a man with confident posture and laugh lines around his eyes. "How long has it been?" he asked. 5 years? 6? 7, I corrected, remembering exactly when we'd last seen each other, at his father's funeral, a brief and somber reunion amid grief. "You look well. So do you." His eyes took in my appearance with appreciation that wasn't entirely friendly. "Cambodia treating you okay?" "How did you know I was in Cambodia?" He smiled, a familiar crooked expression that made my stomach flutter. "Ridiculously. Your mom keeps me updated. I think she's still holding out hope that you'll come to your senses and marry your high school debate partner." I laughed, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "That sounds like Mom, always plotting. She means well." He accepted a glass of wine from a passing server. "So, what brings you back? Holiday visit or something more?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "Bit of both," I admitted. "I'm considering a position in New York, still with the foundation, but based in the States." Interest flickered in his eyes. "Really? That's a change of direction for you." "Maybe it's time for a change." I studied him curiously. "What about you? Mom mentioned you moved back to the area a few years ago?" He nodded. "Took a position at Riverside Hospital, pediatric surgery." "Wow, that's impressive. You always said you wanted to work with kids." "Some of us actually stick to our teenage career plans," he teased gently. "Unlike some of us who abandoned law school dreams for international development." I wouldn't say abandoned. Evolved, maybe. His smile was warm. "It suits you what you do? Always has." Before I could respond, Meg appeared at my elbow. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "But Mom needs you in the kitchen, Liz. Something about the dessert arrangement." I hesitated, reluctant to end the conversation with David. "I'll be right back," I promised him. "I'll be here," he replied, raising his wine glass slightly. "Not going anywhere." The words felt weighted with meaning beyond the moment, but I didn't have time to analyze them as Meg practically pulled me toward the kitchen. "What's so urgent about dessert arrangement?" I asked as we moved through the crowd. "Nothing," Meg admitted once we were in the relative quiet of the hallway. "Mom's fine. I just thought you might need rescuing." "From David? Why would I need rescuing from David?" She gave me a knowing look. "Because you were doing that thing where you twist your necklace around your finger when you're nervous." Dead giveaway? I dropped my hand from my necklace, not having realized I was fidgeting with it. "I wasn't nervous. We were just catching up." "Uh-huh." Her tone was deeply skeptical. "That's why you were blushing like a teenager." "I was not." I stopped, recognizing the futility of denial. "Fine." It was a little intense seeing him again. "We have history." "I'm aware of the history. I lived down the hall when you two were studying in your bedroom sophomore year of college." I felt my face heat again. "That was a long time ago. And yet, here you are, still getting flustered around him." She studied me with interest. "I thought you said there was someone in Cambodia?" "There is. Sort of. It's complicated." I lowered my voice as a guest passed by on the way to the bathroom. "Michael and I work together. It's not exactly a defined relationship. Whereas with David it was very defined, until you left for your first overseas assignment and decided long distance wasn't feasible." Her tone wasn't judgmental, just matter of fact. I stared at her, surprised by her knowledge of details I didn't remember sharing. "How do you know that?" "David and I get coffee sometimes. We're friends." He filled in the blanks. This was news to me. "You and David are friends? Since when?" "Since he moved back 3 years ago. We run into each other at the same coffee shop. Started talking. It happens when you actually stay in one place long enough to develop routines." There was no bite in her words, but the implication was clear. "I see." I wasn't sure how I felt about my sister and my ex being coffee buddies, discussing my past relationship decisions. "Well, as you pointed out, that was all a long time ago. We're just being friendly now." "Of course," Meg agreed too readily. "Just like Mom inviting him tonight was just a neighborly gesture and had nothing to do with you being home." I groaned. She didn't. She absolutely did. Called him personally instead of sending an invitation, said, and I quote, "It would be lovely to have you join us, David. Eliza will be home, and I'm sure she'd enjoy catching up with an old friend." That's mortifying. "That's Mom." Meg shrugged, then her expression softened. "For what it's worth, he asked if you were seeing anyone before accepting the invitation." My heart did a traitorous little flip. "What did she tell him?" "That she had no idea because you never tell her anything about your personal life." And I couldn't help but laugh at that. "Well, she's not wrong." Meg smiled. "Anyway, consider this your official warning that matchmaking is in progress. I've done my sisterly duty." She glanced back toward the party. "Now, if you'll excuse me, there's a cardiologist by the bar that Mom has undoubtedly invited for my benefit, and I need to go disappoint her by showing absolutely no interest in him." She slipped back into the crowd, leaving me alone in the hallway with too many thoughts, competing for attention. I took a moment to compose myself before returning to the party, trying to sort through my confused feelings. David had been my first love, intense, formative, and ultimately sacrificed on the altar of my career ambitions. Seeing him again stirred emotions I'd thought long resolved. But there was also Michael, waiting in Cambodia, our relationship undefined but meaningful in its own way. And beneath both attachments lay my own uncertainties about what I truly wanted in the next phase of my life. I pushed these thoughts aside for the moment and rejoined the party, deliberately circulating among guests rather than returning immediately to David. I spent time with Dad's university colleagues, genuinely interested in their research and grateful for the intellectual conversation that kept my emotional confusion at bay. Later, as I was helping Mom refresh the cookie platter, she leaned close and murmured, "David looks very handsome tonight, doesn't he? He's done so well for himself at the hospital." "Subtle, Mom. Really subtle." She had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I'm not interfering, just observing. You invited him specifically because I was home." "He's a neighbor," she protested, then relented under my skeptical gaze. "Fine, yes. I thought you might enjoy seeing him again. Is that so terrible?" "It's not terrible. It's just complicated." Her expression softened. "Life usually is, sweetheart. Especially matters of the heart." She patted my hand. "Just be open to possibilities. That's all I ask." Before I could respond, she was swept away by another guest with a question about the impressive cheese display, leaving me with her gentle but pointed advice echoing in my mind. The evening continued its elegant progression. The quartet played, conversations flowed, and the carefully planned food and drink were consumed with appreciative comments. I found myself genuinely enjoying the event despite my emotional confusion. There was something comforting about being surrounded by familiar faces in my childhood home, even amid the undercurrents of unresolved family dynamics and unexpected feelings. Around 10 o'clock, I stepped outside onto the back porch for a moment of quiet. The November air was chilly, but refreshing after the warmth of the crowded house. I leaned against the railing, gazing at the familiar backyard now transformed by strategic lighting that highlighted Mom's dormant but still beautiful garden. "Escaping?" a voice asked from behind me. I turned to find David approaching with 2 glasses of wine. "Just taking a breather," I said. "It's a lot of people." "You always did need to step away from crowds occasionally." He handed me one of the wine glasses. "Some things don't change. And some things do." I accepted the glass with a smile of thanks. "Pediatric surgeon, that's impressive." He shrugged modestly. "I enjoy it. The hours are brutal sometimes, but the work is rewarding." I know that combination well. We stood in companionable silence, for a moment sipping our wine and looking out at the garden. The ease between us was both familiar and new, the comfort of our long history layered with the awareness of the adults we had become in the intervening years. "Your sister tells me you might be moving back to the States," he said eventually. "Potentially. There's a position in New York I'm considering." "What would that entail?" "More policy work, less field implementation. Building on the programs we've established in Southeast Asia, but focusing on scaling them through institutional partnerships." I paused, realizing I was slipping into work jargon. "Sorry, basically more time at a desk and less time in rural villages. Is that what you want?" The directness of the question gave me pause. "I'm not sure," I admitted. Part of me knows it's the logical next step career-wise, and being closer to family has its appeal. But I also love the fieldwork, being directly connected to the communities we serve. The eternal dilemma: impact at scale versus impact you can see with your own eyes. His understanding struck me. Most people didn't grasp the nuances of development work, the constant tension between direct service and systemic change. "Exactly," I said, grateful for his perception. "Plus, there are relationships and connections I've built overseas. Leaving would mean—" I trailed off, thinking of Michael and the team in Cambodia. The undefined but meaningful connection that had developed over late-night work sessions and shared commitments. David nodded as if he understood what I wasn't saying. "Roots you've put down there." "Yes, though I've always been careful to keep them shallow enough to pull up when needed." The admission felt more revealing than I'd intended. "That seems lonely," he observed quietly. I looked at him, struck by the insight. "It can be, but it's also uncomplicated in its way. Moving means starting fresh, clean breaks. Like we had?" His tone was gentle, but the question hit its mark. I took a sip of wine before answering. "That was different. We were young." "We were," he agreed. "But I've sometimes wondered if it was youth or if it was just your pattern. Making clean breaks rather than navigating complexity." His perception was uncomfortably accurate. I had always found it easier to compartmentalize my life, to close one chapter completely before opening another. It was cleaner, that way less messy. But it also meant leaving people behind, including him. "That's not entirely fair," I said, though without real conviction. "Probably not," he conceded. "Sorry. Occupational hazard. Pediatric surgeons develop a tendency toward brutal honesty. Kids can always tell when you're sugarcoating." I smiled despite myself. "I've missed that about you, your directness. And I've missed your ability to not take offense at it." His eyes held mine. "Most people prefer comfortable illusions." "What can I say? International development work cures you of illusions pretty quickly." We fell silent again, the conversation having ventured into territory that felt both important and precarious. In the quiet, I could hear the music and laughter from inside the house, the successful party continuing without us. "We should probably go back in," I said eventually. "People will notice we're both missing." "Let them notice." His smile was mischievous, reminiscent of the boy I'd known in high school. "Your mom will be thrilled." I laughed. "You're terrible. Just honest, remember?" As we turned to head back inside, David paused, his expression growing more serious. "For what it's worth, Eliza, I think you'd thrive wherever you decide to be. New York, Cambodia, here. You've always had a gift for making meaningful impact. The question is where you want to put down those roots you've been keeping shallow." His words stayed with me as we rejoined the party, circulating separately but with a new awareness of each other's presence. The evening began winding down around 11, with guests gradually departing with effusive thanks to my parents for their hospitality. By midnight, only a few lingerers remained, including David, who was deep in conversation with Dad about some new surgical technique. Meg caught my eye from across the room and made an exaggerated expression of exhaustion. I nodded in agreement. The evening had been lovely but draining. She mouthed "kitchen" and slipped away from the last group of guests. I followed a moment later, finding her removing her heels with a groan of relief. "If I never see another canapé again, it will be too soon," she declared, massaging her feet. "It was a beautiful party, though," I said, leaning against the counter. "Mom outdid herself." "She always does." Meg reached for a half-empty bottle of wine on the counter and poured 2 glasses, handing one to me. "So you and David seemed to have a nice chat on the porch." I took the wine, choosing to ignore her. Suggestive tone. "We were catching up, that's all." "Uh-huh. That's why Mrs. Ellison told Mom you two looked very cozy out there." I groaned. "The neighborhood gossip network is still as efficient as ever, I see." "Some things never change." Meg took a generous sip of her wine. "For what it's worth, I think it's nice. You two always made sense together." "We're different people now," I pointed out. "It's been 7 years." "Sure, but some connections don't fade with time. They just wait." There was something in her voice that made me look at her more closely. "Are we still talking about me and David, or is this about something else?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just a general observation. People who are right for each other sometimes find their way back, even after time and distance." "Is that what happened with Kyle? Before he left?" I ventured carefully. Meg's expression shuddered. "No, Very much the opposite, actually. She drained her wine glass and set it down with finality. Anyway, I'm exhausted. I'm heading to bed. Meg, it's fine, Liz. Really. Ancient history, remember. She attempted a smile that didn't reach. Her eyes. Good night. Tell Mom I'll help with cleanup in the morning. She left before I could respond, her retreat reminding me of how much remained unspoken between us despite our progress. I sighed, finishing my wine in thoughtful silence. The remaining guests departed shortly after, with David being among the last to leave. His goodbye was brief, a warm hug and a simple, "I'll call you." But it left me with a flutter of anticipation I wasn't quite ready to examine. Mom, Dad, and I did minimal cleanup, agreeing that the bulk of it could wait until morning. As we moved around the kitchen, putting away perishables and rinsing glasses, Mom was practically glowing with satisfaction. That went wonderfully, she declared. Everyone had a lovely time. The food was perfect, the music was elegant, and the conversation never lagged. It was beautiful, Mom, I agreed. You should be proud. I am. She beamed, then added with attempted casualness. I noticed you and David had a chance to catch up. Dad chuckled. Subtlety, Claire. Remember our discussion about subtlety? Mom waved a dismissive hand. I'm merely making an observation. With all the delicacy of a sledgehammer, he teased, then turned to me. You're under no obligation to humor your mother's matchmaking tendencies, Eliza. Thank you, Dad, I said, amused by their familiar dynamic. Though I will say, he added, undermining his previous statement completely, David has grown into quite an impressive young man. His work at the hospital is remarkable. It too, Dad? I shook my head in mock disappointment. I thought you were on my side. He raised his hands in surrender. Just stating facts. What you do with them is entirely your business. Mom finished wiping down the counter and turned to face me fully. All your father and I want is for you to be happy, sweetheart. Whether that's in New York or Cambodia or right here in town, with David or with someone else or on your own. The sincerity in her voice touched me. I know, Mom. I'm figuring it out. Well, while you're figuring it out, it's nice to have you home. She embraced me, and I caught the subtle scent of her perfume, the same one she'd worn throughout my childhood. Now, off to bed. We all need our rest. Upstairs in my room, I changed into pajamas and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind too full for sleep, despite my physical exhaustion. I picked up my phone and saw 3 messages from Michael. How was the big party? Guessing you're still busy with family. Missing you. Call when you can. I stared at the messages, feeling a tug of connection to my life in Cambodia, even as the evening's events had reconnected me to my past here. After a moment's hesitation, I texted back. Party went well. Tired now. Can we talk tomorrow? Much to catch up on. His reply came almost immediately. Of course. Sleep well. The Yaosir heart emoji gave me pause. It was the first time he'd used one in our communications. A small but significant shift in our undefined relationship. I set the phone aside without responding further, not ready to reciprocate or acknowledge the subtle escalation. As I finally settled into bed, my thoughts drifted between David's perceptive comments about my pattern of making clean breaks and Michael's patient presence half a world away. Between them stood my family, Mom with her well-intentioned meddling, Dad with his quiet support, and Meg with her complex mix of resentment and affection toward her prodigal sister. Home was both simpler and more complicated than I remembered. The same could be said for my own heart, which seemed to be pulling me in multiple directions at once. The decision about the New York position had seemed primarily professional when I was in Cambodia. Now, back in my childhood home, with old connections reawakening and family dynamics in full force, it felt much more personal and much more consequential. Sleep eventually claimed me, but my dreams were a confusing blend of past and present, here and there, belonging and longing. I woke the next morning with the sense that whatever decision I made about where to build my future would require not a clean break, but something much more challenging. Integration of the various parts of myself and my life that I had kept carefully compartmentalized for so long. The morning brought the sobering reality of post-party cleanup. Mom, ever organized, had hired the college students to return and help with the heavy lifting, but there was still plenty for the family to do. We worked together efficiently, falling into natural roles, Dad handling trash and recycling, Mom directing operations, Meg and I tackling the kitchen and dining room. As Meg and I carefully wrapped leftover cheese that would likely sustain the family through the next week, she asked casually, "So, has David called yet?" I glanced at the clock, barely 10 a.m. "It's a bit early, don't you think?" "Just checking." The timeline. I have $20 riding on this with Ryan. Ryan? Mom's garden helper Ryan? I stared at her. "You made a bet with the college kid who mows Mom's lawn about when David would call me?" In my defense, he started it. She sealed, a container of brie with careful precision. "He thinks David will wait until tomorrow to seem less eager. I say he'll call before dinner today." I shook my head, torn between amusement and exasperation. Is my love life the subject of general neighborhood speculation? Only among those who witnessed your porch tete-a-tete last night. So, about 2/3 of the party. Wonderful, I groaned. Small-town life at its finest. "Hey, you're the one who's considering moving back," Meg pointed out. "This is what you'd be signing up for." The reminder sobered me. She was right. Returning to the States, especially anywhere near our hometown, would mean relinquishing the anonymity I'd grown accustomed to abroad. My personal life would once again be subject to the well-meaning but relentless interest of family and community. "Speaking of which," Meg continued, "when do you need to decide about the New York job?" "They want an answer by the end of January. It would start in March if I accept." "That's not much time." 6 weeks is plenty, I argued. "I need to wrap things up in Cambodia either way. My current contract ends in February." Meg looked up from her cheese wrapping. "Either way? So you're definitely leaving Cambodia, even if you don't take the New York position?" I hesitated, realizing I'd revealed more than I'd intended. "I'm ready for a change," I said finally,